"Happy birthday, Mom." Leo's voice was flat, impatient. He held out the small, greasy paper box like it was a piece of trash he was being forced to handle. Clara stood beside him, checking her watch, her silk dress shimmering under the harsh kitchen light. She didn't look at me. She looked through me. "We got you something," she added, her tone a perfect match for her brother's. A chore completed. A box ticked. I took the box. My hands, wrinkled and spotted from 70 years of sun and work, felt clumsy around the flimsy cardboard. Inside, a single cupcake sat listing to one side. Its frosting, a pale, sickly yellow, was cracked and dry, as if it had been sitting in a display case for a week. A cheap wax candle bent in the middle was jammed into its peak. It wasn't just a small offering, it was an insult sculpted from sugar and flour. My children, my Leo and Clara, for whom I had sacrificed everything, were in a hurry. They were dressed for an occasion. Clearly, I was not it. I manufactured a smile, a brittle thing that felt like it might crack my face. "Thank you," I whispered. The words tasted like dust in my mouth. "It's lovely." Leo just nodded, already turning towards the door, jingling his car keys. Clara offered a tight, meaningless smile. "We have to run, Mom. Some friends are having a thing. You know how it is." I did know. I knew they were lying. I just didn't know the scale of it yet. They left. The front door clicked shut, and the silence they left behind was vast and heavy. It filled the kitchen, seeped into the living room, and pressed down on me from the high ceilings of the house my husband David and I had built with our bare hands. For a long time I just stood there, the pathetic little cupcake in my hands. I peeled back the paper liner. It stuck to the dry cake. I took a bite, stale. The sweetness was cloying, artificial. It was the taste of pity, the taste of being a burden. I threw the rest of it in the trash, watching it land on a bed of coffee grounds. It looked right at home. I washed my hands, scrubbing them as if to get the feel of that greasy box off my skin. The house was quiet, too quiet. On my 70th birthday, the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the frantic beating of my own heart. I wandered into the living room, the one with the large bay window that overlooked the fields. I sank into my armchair, David's old chair, the leather worn smooth over decades. The tablet Clara had given me last Christmas, "So you can stay connected, Mom," was on the side table. My fingers, acting of their own accord, picked it up. My thumb swiped the screen to life. I just wanted to see my grandchildren's faces. Maybe they had posted something. Maybe they remembered. The screen glowed, and there it was. Not a post from a grandchild, but from Clara. Her profile picture, a professionally taken shot of her laughing into the distance, was circled in a vibrant celebratory ring, an Instagram story. My finger trembled as I tapped it. The screen filled with a video. The sound of popping champagne, of laughter, of music thrumming over the roar of a motor. The camera panned across the deck of a magnificent yacht, gliding through shimmering blue water under a perfect, cloudless sky. White leather seats, gleaming chrome. Waiters in crisp uniforms moved through a crowd of laughing, beautifully dressed people, my family, my entire family. There was Leo, raising a champagne flute, his arm around his wife, both of them beaming. There were my grandchildren, teenagers now, taking selfies with the ocean behind them. There was Clara, the star of her own show, hugging friends I recognized, neighbors I'd shared coffee with for 20 years. They were all there, all of them. In the center of the deck, on a table laden with food, sat a cake, not a cupcake, a 3-tiered masterpiece adorned with fresh flowers and golden script that I couldn't quite make out. The camera zoomed in. And then I saw it. The caption, written in bubbly, cheerful font, superimposed over the image of my smiling, celebrating family. "Celebrating life! Happy 70th, Mom! Wish you were here." Wish you were here. The words were a digital dagger. They weren't celebrating with me. They were celebrating in spite of me. They had built a party around my absence. The tablet slipped from my lap and clattered onto the hardwood floor. The sound was unnaturally loud in the empty house. I didn't bend to pick it up. I couldn't move. A coldness, deeper than any winter chill, started in my chest and spread through my limbs, turning my blood to ice water. I stared at the bay window, but I didn't see the fields my husband and I had poured our souls into. I saw their faces, laughing, toasting, oblivious, or worse, not oblivious at all. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an oversight. It was a statement, a declaration that my life, the one being celebrated, was now an abstraction, a convenient excuse for a party I was not welcome to attend. They had packaged my milestone, my 70 years on this earth, into a hashtag and a photo op, and left the actual person, the woman who gave them everything, to eat a stale cupcake in an empty house. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing me down into the old leather chair. I felt hollowed out, a ghost in my own home, watching my life being lived by everyone but me. Hours passed. The sun bled across the sky, painting the fields in hues of orange and purple before sinking below the horizon, leaving the world in shadow. I didn't turn on a light. I just sat there, in the dark, the fallen tablet still on the floor, its screen long gone black. The house was a tomb, filled with the ghosts of happier memories, birthdays past when the rooms were filled with genuine laughter, with children who looked at me with love, not with pity or impatience. I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway, the sound of car doors opening and closing, their voices, muffled at first, then clearer as they approached the front door. I didn't move. I shrank back into the armchair, letting the darkness of the living room swallow me. A part of me wanted to confront them, to scream, to show them the picture on the tablet and demand an explanation. But a deeper, colder part of me knew it was useless. It told me to stay silent, to listen. The key turned in the lock. The front door opened and closed, plunging the entryway into the same darkness I occupied. A purse thudded onto the hall table. A heavy sigh from Leo. "God, I'm exhausted," he said. His voice was different now. Not the flat, dismissive tone from the morning, but a low, conspiratorial hiss that slithered down the hallway towards me. "Tell me about it," Clara's voice replied, equally quiet, laced with a strange kind of weary satisfaction. "But it was worth it. Everyone had a great time." "Everyone that matters," Leo corrected her. There was a pause. I held my breath, my heart a cold, hard knot in my chest. I could hear the rustle of her silk dress as she leaned against the wall. "Don't start, Leo," she warned. "We're doing what we have to do. You know that." "I know," he sighed again. "It just feels... I don't know. It feels necessary." Clara's voice was sharp, cutting through the darkness with a chilling certainty. "She's just not all there anymore, Leo. You see it, I see it. The forgotten appointments, the repeating stories. It's getting worse." Every word was a nail being hammered into my coffin. I was sitting right there, feet away, fully present, my mind sharp as ever, and they were talking about me as if I were already gone. A problem to be managed. Leo's voice dropped even lower, a venomous whisper. "The doctor's appointment next week will confirm it." I spoke to Dr. Evans's office. Explained the situation. They were very understanding. "Confirm it?" Explained the situation. They weren't taking me to a doctor for a checkup. They were taking me for an assessment, an ambush. They were building a case against my own mind. "Good," Clara said. The relief in her voice was sickening. "Once we have the paperwork, we can move forward. It's for her own good, Leo. To protect her assets. She can't manage a place this size anymore. It's a liability. Her assets, my farm, my home, my life's work. They weren't protecting me. They were protecting their inheritance. They were circling my life's work like vultures, waiting for me to be declared dead enough for them to feast. It's a mercy, really," Clara concluded, her voice softening into a tone of false compassion that was more monstrous than any shout. "We'll make sure she's comfortable. We'll take care of everything." Take care of everything. The words echoed in the silent house. They weren't just neglecting me. They were building a cage for me. A comfortable cage, perhaps, with soft pillows and warm meals, but a cage nonetheless. And the bars weren't made of iron. They were being forged from their lies, their pity, their greed. The party on the yacht wasn't a celebration of my life. It was a celebration of its imminent end. The leftover cupcake wasn't just a thoughtless gesture, it was the first taste of the scraps they planned to feed me once I was powerless. I sat frozen in the darkness, the whispers from the hall fading as they moved further into the house. They didn't even check the living room. They assumed the old woman was in bed, sleeping, dreaming her muddled dreams. They had no idea she was wide awake, her mind clearer than it had ever been, listening to her own children plotting her burial, brick by insidious brick. The silence in this house has a weight to it. It's not the peaceful quiet of a home at rest. It's the heavy, suffocating silence of a tomb. After the sound of Leo's car faded down the gravel drive, leaving me alone with their whispered words still echoing in the kitchen, the old house seemed to exhale. The floorboards groaned under my feet, a familiar sound that has been the soundtrack to my life for 50 years. But tonight, it sounded like a warning. I walked through the rooms, my hand trailing along the walls that David and I had put up with our own hands. Every knot in the wood, every faded patch of paint, was a chapter in my story, a story my children were trying to erase. They think I am just an old woman, a relic, a collection of fading memories and fragile bones that stands between them and their inheritance. But they don't know who I am. I am Sophia, and this farm is not just dirt and wood, fences and fields. It is the scar tissue of my life, the testament to every choice I ever made. I remember when David first brought me here. It was nothing then. Just 200 acres of wild, untamed California land, golden in the summer heat and stubborn as a mule. He stood on a dusty ridge, his eyes shining with a light I'd never seen before, not even on the day he proposed. He didn't see the rocks and the weeds. He saw a home. He saw a future. And because I loved him, I saw it too. I was a nurse back then, working in a busy city hospital. I loved the clean, sterile order of it, the quiet hum of life-saving machines, the feeling of a patient's hand gripping mine in gratitude. My world was one of charts and schedules, of science and compassion. I had a career, a purpose that was entirely my own. But David's dream was bigger than my own, and soon it became ours. We poured everything we had, and everything we didn't, into this land. We sold my small car. We cashed in the few bonds my parents had left me. We worked from sunup until our muscles screamed in protest, long after the moon had risen. I traded my crisp white uniform for denim overalls stained with dirt and grease. I learned to mend fences, to birth calves in the dead of winter, to read the sky for signs of rain. My hands, once soft and skilled at finding a vein or soothing a fevered brow, grew rough and calloused. The delicate skin cracked and bled, but I'd just wrap them and keep going. David would sometimes take my hands in his at the end of the day, tracing the new lines with his thumb. "These are good hands, Sophia," he'd say, his voice thick with a love that filled every crack in my spirit. "These are the hands that are building our world." And we did build it. We built the barn, beam by heavy beam. We built the house, room by room, our laughter echoing in the empty spaces before the walls were even finished. And then, we filled it with life. First Leo, then Clara. My children. They were born of this land as much as they were born of me. Their first steps were on this soil. Their first words were shouted into the vast open air. I thought I was giving them the greatest gift imaginable, a foundation, roots, something real in a world that was becoming less and less so. When Leo was old enough for school, I saw the fire in his eyes was different from his father's. It wasn't for the land, it was for numbers, for deals, for the thrill of the city he read about in magazines. He wanted to go to a prestigious business school back east. The tuition was more money than we had ever seen at one time. David looked at our ledgers, his face grim. "We can't, Soph," he said, the words hurting him more than me. "There's just no way." But that night, I lay awake listening to the crickets, and I made a choice. The next day, I hung up my nursing pin for good. I took on extra shifts at a local diner, my feet aching in worn-out shoes, and I started a small business selling our jams and pies at the farmer's market. Every dollar, every single cent, went into a jar labeled Leo's Future. He got his education. I watched him walk across that stage, so handsome in his cap and gown, and my heart swelled with a pride so fierce it almost hurt. I had done that. His mother, the farmer, had put him in that world of ambition and success. Then there was Clara. My quiet, artistic soul. She didn't see spreadsheets. She saw colors in the sunset that I had never noticed. She saw poetry in the shape of a twisted oak tree. She wanted art classes, expensive paints, canvases, a world that this dusty farm couldn't provide. So I sold my mother's jewelry, the last fine things I owned. I told myself that her art was a more beautiful legacy than a gold locket and a string of pearls. I drove her 2 hours into the city every Saturday for her lessons, waiting in the car with a book, content to just know she was happy, that she was nurturing the gift she'd been given. I gave them the world, or at least, the parts of it they wanted. I thought I was building a legacy for them to inherit, a fortress of love and sacrifice. I never realized I was only building my own prison, stone by heavy stone. The world I built for them grew, while mine shrank, until it was contained entirely within the fences of this farm. And now, the children I gave everything for want to take the last thing I have left. But there was another ghost here, one they never knew. A ghost that haunted the edges of my memory, a name that was never spoken aloud. My brother, Elias. Looking at the fading photograph on the mantel, the one David insisted we keep, I can almost see him. A boy with dark, intense eyes, so much like our father's, standing just a little apart from the rest of us. He was brilliant, ambitious, and saw the world in a way our father couldn't comprehend. Our father was a man of tradition, of doing things the way they had always been done. Elias saw the future coming and wanted to run toward it. Their final argument was like a summer storm that had been brewing for years. It wasn't just a business feud. It was a clash of generations, of two worlds colliding in our small living room. I remember the shouting, the accusations of betrayal and disrespect. My father, his face purple with rage, pointed a trembling finger toward the door. "If you think you know so much better," he roared, "then go, and don't ever come back. This family, this business, is no longer yours." Elias didn't even pack a bag. He just looked at me, his eyes filled with a sorrow so deep it stole my breath. Then he turned and walked out, the slam of the door sealing his fate and ours. After that day, we were forbidden to speak his name. It was as if he had never existed. My father's grief hardened into a bitter, unyielding silence. Any letter that arrived with Elias's handwriting was thrown into the fire, unread. Any attempt to ask after him was met with a wall of cold fury. David and I were young, caught between loyalty to my father and the love for my lost brother. In the end, the silence won. Years turned into decades. We heard whispers, rumors of his success, a shipping company, then technology, then a name that appeared in financial journals. He became a tycoon, a myth, a man who had built an empire from nothing after being cast out with nothing. In my heart, a quiet belief took root and grew. I convinced myself that he had forgotten us. Why wouldn't he? We were part of the life that had rejected him. He was out there, conquering the world while I was here, tilling the soil. This farm became my only inheritance, my sole claim to the family he had left behind. It was the one piece of our family he couldn't touch, the one thing that was mine and David's alone. It was my sanctuary, my identity. The thought that he was somewhere out there, a stranger with my blood in his veins, only made me hold on to this land tighter. It was the only truth I had left, or so I thought. Now, sitting in the dark, with the whispers of my own children condemning me, I feel the ghosts of David and Elias swirling around me, and I wonder what other truths I've been blind to all my life. The silence of my own home had become a language I was forced to learn. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was heavy, suffocating, filled with the unspoken words of my own children. The first lesson in this new, cruel dialect came on a gray Wednesday morning at the kitchen table, the very table where David and I had planned our lives, celebrated our children's birthdays, and mourned our losses. Now, it was a boardroom, and I was being downsized from my own life. Leo sat opposite me, his laptop open. He'd always had a way of making everything feel like a business transaction. He wore a crisp shirt, even at 8 a.m. In the farmhouse kitchen, Clara was beside him, scrolling on her phone, but I knew she was listening, a silent partner in this coup. Mom, Leo began, his voice smooth and practiced, the one he used on clients. Clara and I have been talking. We're worried about you, about all the stress of managing everything on your own. The bills, the pension, the farm taxes, it's a lot. I said nothing. I just stirred my tea, the clinking of the spoon against the ceramic mug the only sound I dared to make. Stress wasn't what was aging me. It was the calculated chill in their eyes. So, he continued, turning his laptop screen towards me. It was filled with charts and graphs, colors and numbers that meant nothing and everything. I've taken the liberty of streamlining our finances. I've set up a joint family account. Everything will go in there, your pension, the farm's income, our contributions. It'll be so much simpler, all automated. You won't have to worry about a thing. My hand stopped stirring. My pension? Leo, that's mine. Your father and I. Exactly, Mom. It's ours, Clara chirped, looking up from her phone for the first time, her smile bright and utterly false. We're a family. We share everything. This way, we can make sure you're taken care of properly. To that end, Leo said, sliding a thin plastic card across the polished oak of the table. It was a debit card, a sterile blue, with the bank's logo and my name. We've set you up with a weekly allowance. It'll load up automatically every Monday. Plenty for groceries, your knitting supplies, whatever little things you need. An allowance. At 70 years old, in the house I had built with my own 2 hands, I was being given an allowance. The word hung in the air, a shimmering, ugly thing. I was a child again, but without the innocence. I looked at the card. It was a leash, a digital chain that tethered me to their control. My life savings, my independence, my very financial identity had just been swallowed by a spreadsheet on my son's laptop. I wanted to scream. I wanted to sweep the laptop off the table and tell them what their father would have thought of this. David would have seen the greed for what it was. But I looked at their faces, Leo's impatient, boardroom confidence, Clara's placid, self-righteous agreement, and I knew it was useless. They had already decided. I was no longer a person. I was an asset to be managed. So I picked up the card. It felt cold and foreign in my palm. "Thank you," I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. The weeks that followed settled into a grim routine. The house grew quieter, but my world grew smaller. The meals changed. My daughter-in-law, Leo's wife, started preparing separate dishes. For them, it was roasted chicken, fresh salads, pasta with rich sauces. For me, placed at the far end of the table, as if I were a distant relative visiting, it was often a bowl of soup and a piece of bread, or leftovers from the day before, served on a chipped plate. One evening, they ran out of clean glasses, and Clara handed me a red plastic cup for my water, the kind you buy for a child's birthday party. They all drank from heavy, sparkling glassware. No one said a word. The plastic cup was a statement, a quiet demotion. I was no longer worthy of glass. My television access was next. They said the cable bill was too high. Leo installed some streaming device he could control from his phone. Suddenly, my favorite evening news channels were gone, replaced by a curated menu of bland cooking shows and old sitcoms. "It's better for you, Mom," Clara said, patting my hand. Less stressful than all that negative news. They were insulating me, not for my peace of mind, but for theirs. An uninformed mother was a compliant one. Then came the performance for the outside world. Clara, with her thousands of online followers, decided my life needed to be a brand. "We need to show everyone how great you're doing, Mom," she'd say, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. She would lead me into the garden, my sanctuary, and pose me like a doll. "Hold the trowel, Mom." "Yes, like that. Now look at the roses. Smile, a big, happy smile." I would force the muscles in my face to obey, a grotesque parody of joy. My hands, caked with the real soil of my life's work, would feel alien, holding a pristine trowel for a photograph. Clara would snap a dozen pictures, her phone clicking like a tiny, insistent insect. Later that day, I'd see the post on her tablet. A photo of me, smiling a dead smile, under a caption that read, "So happy to see Mom thriving in her garden. She's my inspiration. #family first, #blessed /farm life." The comments would pour in. "Your mother is beautiful. You're such a good daughter, Clara." Each like was a small, sharp stab. They were applauding my jailer. They were celebrating the fiction of my happiness, while the reality of my life was a slow, creeping erosion. I was a ghost in my own home, a prop in my own life story, curated and captioned by the children who were methodically erasing me. The bitterness was a constant coating on my tongue, a flavor I could no longer wash away. The charade escalated on a Tuesday that felt just like any other, until Leo's car crunched up the gravel driveway, a second car following close behind. A man I'd never seen before got out. He was tall, dressed in practical work boots and a collared shirt with a company logo I didn't recognize. He carried a tripod and a strange-looking device. "Mom!" Leo called out, his voice booming with a false cheerfulness that always set my teeth on edge. "Come and meet Richard. He's an architect friend of mine. I was thinking we could finally build that gazebo you've always wanted out by the peony beds." I had never wanted a gazebo. David and I had talked about it once, years ago, and decided we preferred the open sky. I looked at the man, Richard. He didn't have the soft hands or the dreamy eyes of an architect. He had a surveyor's steady gaze, an eye for lines and boundaries, not for beauty. He gave me a polite, professional nod, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "A pleasure to meet you, ma'am," he said, his voice neutral. "Richard's just going to take a look around. Get the lay of the land," Leo announced, clapping the man on the shoulder. "You know, make sure we pick the perfect spot." But Richard didn't walk toward the peony beds. He and his assistant started at the far edge of the property, by the old oak tree that marked the western boundary. I watched from the kitchen window, my heart a cold, hard knot in my chest. He wasn't sketching or looking at the house. He was setting up his tripod, peering through the lens of his total station. The laser device he used sent an invisible beam across the fields my husband had plowed for 40 years. They weren't planning a gazebo. You don't survey 200 acres for a gazebo. I watched them for hours. They moved methodically, planting small orange flags at intervals along the property line. Each flag was a stake driven through my heart. They walked through my vegetable garden, their boots indifferent to the tender lettuce shoots. Richard trampled right over a patch of my prized peonies, the deep pink blossoms crushed under the heel of his boot. He didn't even notice. To him, they weren't flowers I had nurtured from bulbs gifted to me by my own mother. They were just an obstacle on a grid. Leo stayed inside with me, making small talk, a warden keeping his prisoner occupied. He asked about the weather, about a recipe, about anything to keep my eyes off the methodical dissection of my land happening just outside the window. His cheerfulness was a weapon, designed to make my suspicions seem like the paranoia of a confused old woman. "Isn't this exciting, Mom? It's going to be beautiful," he said, pouring me a cup of tea I hadn't asked for. I looked from his smiling face to the men in the distance, their figures small against the vastness of the land they were measuring for sale. They were carving it up, pricing it, preparing it for a fate I couldn't bear to imagine. The land was an extension of my body, of my memory, of my marriage. Every acre held a story, a struggle, a victory, and they were selling it all for a number on a page. The lie about the gazebo wasn't just a lie, it was an insult. It suggested I was too stupid, too senile, to understand what I was seeing with my own two eyes. I felt a wave of nausea. The velvet cage was shrinking. Now its bars were the very property lines of my home. The ultimate violation came cloaked as a gift. It was Mother's Day, a day that had once been filled with handmade cards and clumsy, heartfelt breakfasts in bed. Now, it was another staged event. Leo and Clara presented me with a small, elegant box tied with a satin ribbon. "Happy Mother's Day, Mom," Clara said, her voice filled with a practiced warmth that made my skin crawl. I opened the box. Nestled on a bed of black velvet was a necklace. It was simple, modern, a thin gold chain with a small, flat, circular pendant. It was beautiful, I had to admit, deceptively so. "It's from a new tech company," Leo explained, leaning forward. "It's a smart pendant for your safety." "It has fall detection," Clara added eagerly, "and you can press the button to call for help if you ever need anything. It connects right to our phones. We'll have peace of mind knowing you're always safe." Her smile was an advertisement, bright and persuasive. She took the necklace from the box and fastened it around my neck. The metal was cool against my skin. It felt heavy, much heavier than its delicate appearance suggested. I forced a smile, murmuring my thanks. They beamed, pleased with their own generosity, their own cleverness. They had found a way to brand their surveillance as love. That night I couldn't sleep. The pendant lay cold against my collarbone, a constant alien presence. I felt watched. Long after the house was dark and silent, I slipped out of bed and went to my sewing room. I sat at the desk where I did my mending, the same desk where I kept David's old magnifying glass, the one he used for reading maps and fine print. My hands trembled as I picked it up. Under the bright light of my task lamp, I examined the pendant. It was smooth, seamless gold, elegant and minimalist. But as I tilted it, the light caught something, a tiny, almost invisible hole drilled into the edge. My breath caught in my throat. I turned it over and over, my heart hammering against my ribs. And then I saw it, on the back, so faint it was nearly imperceptible. A tiny seam. I took a needle from my sewing kit and carefully, painstakingly, worked at the seam. It popped open. Inside, there was no complex mechanism for fall detection. There was a tiny circuit board, a SIM card, and a microphone grill no bigger than a pinprick. The charging port was cleverly hidden on the clasp itself. It wasn't a gift. It wasn't for my safety. It was a bug, a tracking device, a listening post they had placed on my very person. A wave of cold dread washed over me, so intense it felt like I was drowning. They weren't just watching my money. They weren't just measuring my land. They were listening to my silence. They wanted to own my solitude, to monitor my sighs, to record my muttered prayers in the dead of night. There was no escape. The walls had ears, and now, so did the air I breathed. My children had not just built a cage around me. They had placed a spy inside my soul. The loneliness I felt was no longer just an absence of love. It was the terrifying presence of constant, unseen observation. I sat there in the silence of my sewing room, the damning little piece of technology in my palm, and understood. They were waiting for me to break, and they wanted to be sure they would hear it when I did. It was the rhythm of the mail truck that first signaled the change. It was a mundane sound, a rattling diesel engine that had marked the mid-morning hour for decades, as reliable as the sun climbing over the eastern fields. But that day, the sound carried a different weight. It felt less like a delivery and more like a summons. I was on my knees in the garden, my hands deep in the cool, dark earth, the scent of tomato vines sharp in the air. The smart necklace Clara had given me felt unusually heavy against my collarbone, a cold, unblinking eye against my skin. I watched old Tom pull up to the mailbox at the end of the long driveway. He didn't wave as he used to. He'd known me for 30 years, had shared coffee at my kitchen table after David's funeral. Now, he just pushed the mail into the box and drove on, his gaze fixed firmly on the road ahead. Clara's curated world of my smiling, blissful dotage had done its work. I was no longer a neighbor. I was a fragile artifact, a subject of pity to be handled with care and kept at a distance. I walked the length of the driveway, the gravel crunching under my worn boots. My heart was thumping a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Inside the box, amidst the usual circulars and a glossy catalog for garden gnomes, was a single crisp envelope. It was cream-colored, stiff with importance. In the top left corner, the embossed seal caught the light. Etheria County Land Registry, a certified letter. My breath caught in my throat. The land registry? We hadn't had dealings with them since David and I paid off the last of the original mortgage a lifetime ago. I reached for it, my fingers trembling slightly. But before they could close around the paper, another hand shot out, intercepting it. Leo. He had moved with a startling, silent speed, appearing at my shoulder as if summoned from the dust itself. He plucked the envelope from the box, his movements unnaturally casual. "Just junk mail, Mom," he said, his voice a little too bright. He didn't look at the envelope, but he didn't need to. He knew exactly what it was. He started to fold it, to shove it into the back pocket of his jeans. "Leo, let me see that," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "It's nothing. Just some county notice about property taxes. I'll take care of it." He still wouldn't meet my eyes. He was looking over my head at the farmhouse, as if admiring the paint job he'd never offered to help with. "It's certified," I stated, not as a question. "They don't send tax notices by certified mail." He finally looked at me, and in that fleeting moment, I saw it. It wasn't just nervousness. It was the raw, primal panic of a cornered animal. A flicker of cold sweat on his brow, the slight twitch in his jaw, the way his knuckles were white where he gripped the letter. It was the look of a boy who had been caught with his hand deep in the cookie jar, except the jar was my life, and he was about to smash it on the floor. "I'll handle it, Mom. You don't need to worry about these things anymore. That's what we're here for." He gave me a thin, brittle smile and patted my arm. The gesture was meant to be reassuring, but it felt like he was checking to see if I was still real. He turned and walked back toward the house, the stolen letter a damning rectangle in his pocket. I stood there for a long time, the sun beating down on my head, the scent of the tomato plants now smelling of rot and decay. The facade hadn't just cracked. A chunk of the wall had fallen away, and for the first time, I could see the darkness that lay behind it. The lie came to me 2 days later, fully formed, as I was washing the dishes and staring out at the fields. I would tell them I was visiting Martha. Martha, my friend from my old nursing days. She lived 2 towns over, had moved into a retirement community years ago, and was just forgetful enough that if my children did call to check, she might vaguely confirm a visit that never happened. The plan was a small, ugly thing, but it was mine. "I think I'll take the bus over to see Martha tomorrow," I announced at dinner, my voice carefully nonchalant. "It's been too long." Clara looked up from her phone, her brow furrowed with manufactured concern. "The bus, Mom? All by yourself? I can drive you." No, I insisted, waving a dismissive hand. "The fresh air will do me good. I like the bus. It'll be an adventure." Leo just nodded, his eyes on his plate. "Sure, Mom. Good idea." He was relieved. A day out of their hair, a day they wouldn't have to perform their roles as my wardens. The ease with which they accepted it was another small cut. The next morning, the simple act of walking to the bus stop at the edge of town felt like a prison break. I wore my plainest dress and a wide-brimmed hat, feeling like a spy in my own life. The fare, paid with a crumpled $10 bill from the small housekeeping stash I kept hidden in a tin of Earl Grey tea, felt like a declaration of independence. The bus was old, sighing and groaning as it pulled away from the curb. I sank into a worn vinyl seat by the window and watched my town recede, the familiar storefronts and houses blurring into a landscape I no longer recognized as home. The world outside my farm was shockingly alive. People laughed, argued, rushed to appointments, their lives messy and real and utterly their own. I had been living in a silent, beautifully decorated mausoleum, and I hadn't even known it. I didn't get off at Martha's stop. I stayed on until the bus reached the county seat, a small city that felt like a metropolis. The Etheria County Administration Building was an imposing block of concrete and glass, a monument to a bureaucracy that held my fate in its filing cabinets. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of floor wax and old paper. I approached the records counter, my heart a frantic bird in my chest. A young man with kind eyes and a name tag that read Ben looked up. "Can I help you, ma'am?" I need to see the file for the Miller farm, on Route 4, I said, my voice barely a whisper. He typed into his computer. "Sophia Miller?" He looked up at me, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "Wait a minute. You're David Miller's wife, aren't you?" I nodded, my throat tight. A slow smile spread across his face. "I remember him. He used to bring a box of donuts in for the whole office every year on tax day. Said we looked like we needed it." He chuckled, a warm, genuine sound. "Best man. My dad was the clerk back then. He always said David Miller was the salt of the earth." That small memory, that act of kindness from a man long dead, was the key. Ben's demeanor shifted from professional to protective. "Listen," he said, lowering his voice. "Technically, you need to file a formal request. It takes a few days, but for David..." He glanced around the quiet office. "Come with me." He led me past the counter into a small, windowless back room filled with shelves of gray binders. He returned a few minutes later with a thick manila folder. He placed it gently on the table in front of me. "Here you are, Mrs. Miller." He lingered for a moment. "Just let me know if you need anything." He closed the door, leaving me alone with the truth. My hands shook as I opened the folder. It was all there, laid out in cold, legal precision. The first document was the deed of sale. The heavy paper felt obscene in my hands. The farm, my home. 200 acres of memories, of sweat and soil and love, reduced to a parcel number and a price that seemed impossibly low. It was sold. Then I saw my signature on the bottom line. It was a monstrous forgery, a clumsy, grotesque imitation of my name. The loops were too wide, the slant was all wrong. It looked like the signature of a stranger, a ghost who had stolen my identity. It was an act of such profound contempt, it stole the air from my lungs. My entire life, my partnership with David, our legacy, all erased by this crude scrawl. Stapled behind the deed was the justification. A 3-page medical assessment from a Dr. Alistair Evans, a name I had never heard. I read the words and the room began to spin. Advanced cognitive decline, significant memory impairment, inability to comprehend or manage complex financial affairs, mentally incompetent. They had not just stolen my farm, they had stolen my mind. They had declared me dead in spirit, a hollow shell to be managed and disposed of. It was a legal execution, signed and sealed by a doctor I had never met. And the buyer? The new owner of my soul. A name that meant nothing and everything. EV. Holdings, LLC. A string of letters. A limited liability corporation. A phantom, faceless, bloodless, and absolute. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. A silence deeper than any I had ever known fell over me. The fluorescent lights hummed. The smell of old paper was suffocating. I stared at the forged signature, at the clinical words that declared me insane, and I felt myself dissolving. Sophia Miller, the woman who had raised 2 children, nursed the sick, and built a life from nothing, was gone. In her place was this file, this collection of lies. I was a ghost, haunting the ruins of a life that was no longer mine. The bus ride home was a journey through a foreign country. The familiar landmarks, the old oak tree struck by lightning, the red barn with the faded chewing tobacco ad, were props on a stage set. I was an actress playing the part of a woman returning home, but the home was gone. The numbness was a mercy, a thick blanket of fog protecting me from the full force of the hurricane that had just leveled my world. When I stepped into the house, the silence was different. It was no longer the quiet of a peaceful farmhouse. It was the hollow echo of a tomb. Clara's perfectly arranged throw pillows on the sofa, Leo's business magazines fanned out on the coffee table. They were the artifacts of my captors. Every object was a lie. My gaze fell on the old, sea-worn lockbox under the window seat. David's box. It had been his one truly private space. It held his discharge papers from the army, some old medals, and whatever other secrets a man keeps from his wife. In 45 years of marriage, I had never once opened it. It was a boundary I respected, but the world in which that respect mattered had ceased to exist. I went to the tool shed and returned with a crowbar. The act felt like a desecration. I wedged the tip into the seam and pushed. The metal groaned, resisted, then gave way with a sickening screech. The lid sprang open. Inside, beneath his dog tags and a faded photograph of us on our wedding day, were letters. Dozens of them, bundled in stacks and tied with twine. The top bundle was written on thin airmail paper. The return address was from cities all over the world. The handwriting was sharp, aggressive, and achingly familiar. It was the handwriting of my brother, Elias. My hands trembled as I untied the first bundle. The letters spanned decades. I sat on the floor, the dust motes dancing in the late afternoon sun, and I began to read. I read of a secret that had run like a hidden river beneath the bedrock of my marriage. The first letter was from David, dated 50 years ago, not long after my father had thrown Elias out. My father, a man of rigid pride, saw Elias's ambition not as a virtue, but as a betrayal of the family's simple farming life. "He's a good boy, Elias," David had written. He just sees a bigger world than your father can imagine. Here is what I can spare. It's not much, but it's a start. I've taken a loan against a corner of the farm. Don't tell Sophia. It's not that I don't trust her, but I want to protect her from her father's wrath. This is between us. Make us proud. A loan, secured against our farm, a seed of betrayal planted in the soil of good intentions. A secret kept to protect me, which had now left me utterly exposed. I read on, through years of correspondence. Elias's first struggling business, David's quiet words of encouragement, the growth of Elias's ventures into a global enterprise, a secret partnership, a hidden brotherhood I was never a part of. I felt a pang of hurt, of being an outsider in my own marriage. But the true devastation was yet to come. It was at the very bottom of the box, a single envelope, separate from the others. David's hand, but weaker, the cursive trembling, dated just a week before the heart attack took him. I unfolded the page. It was a letter to Elias. It shattered me. "Brother," it began, "I'm not long for this world. I can feel it in my bones. I'm writing because I see a shadow in my own children. I see their father's pride mixed with a modern kind of greed I don't understand. They look at this land, this farm that is Sophia's heart, not with love, but with calculation. They see it as an asset, a number on a balance sheet. It terrifies me." The words on the page blurred through my tears. I have failed Elias. I raised them with everything, and it has made them want more. They are soft where we were hard. I fear what they will do to their mother when I'm gone. They will see her as an obstacle. So I'm calling in my debt, the one we never spoke of. If they turn on her brother, you know what to do. The farm is your debt, but it is her soul. Protect her soul for me. I dropped the letter as if it had burned my hands. It was a confession, a prophecy, and a final, desperate plea. My husband, my David, had seen it all coming. He had seen the vipers he had raised, and his solution was not to trust me, not to empower me, but to make a pact with a ghost from my past. He had betrayed my trust to protect me from our children's betrayal. I was trapped between two currents of love, both of which had conspired to drown me. I sat there on the floor, surrounded by the ghosts of my husband and my brother, utterly, completely alone. The resolve that grew from that despair was cold and hard as winter iron. I had evidence. I had the letters. I had the truth. But I was a 70-year-old woman whom the world had already dismissed as senile. I needed a lawyer. The name that came to mind was Arthur Davies. His firm was on the town square, a bastion of local respectability. He had handled the legalities of David's will. He had sent a floral arrangement to the funeral. He had known my family for years. He was, I thought, a safe harbor. His office was exactly as I remembered, smelling of leather and lemon polish, the walls lined with dusty legal tomes. A silver-framed photo of his smiling wife and grandchildren sat on the corner of his mahogany desk. He greeted me with a warm, practiced smile. "Sophia, what a pleasant surprise. Please sit. Coffee?" "No, thank you, Arthur," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I sat in the plush leather chair opposite him and opened my handbag. I laid everything on his desk. A copy of the forged deed, the fraudulent medical report, and David's last terrible letter. "I need to hire you," I said simply. "My children have sold my farm without my knowledge, using forged documents." He listened. He picked up each document, his expression one of patient gravity, but he didn't really read them. His eyes skimmed the pages, his mind already somewhere else. He was performing the act of listening, his body language a symphony of condescension. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers, a gesture I'm sure he thought made him look thoughtful and wise. "Sophia," he began, his voice syrupy with false sympathy. "Family disputes are always so messy, complicated." He leaned forward and patted my hand, which was resting on his desk. The touch was meant to be comforting, but it was profoundly infantilizing. Sometimes, as we get older, things can get a bit confused. Our memories, they can play tricks on us. We misremember things, get facts jumbled. I pulled my hand away. "Arthur, I am not confused. My signature was forged. I have never met this Dr. Evans. "I'm sure it feels that way," he said smoothly. "And I've no doubt Leo and Clara's actions might seem drastic, but I've spoken with them. They're deeply concerned for your well-being. They're just trying to manage your assets to ensure you're taken care of for the rest of your life." He had already spoken with them. The trap had been set long before I walked in. I was no longer a potential client. I was the subject of a problem to be managed. "They are stealing from me," I said, the words like stones in my mouth. "And they have committed fraud." He sighed, a long, weary exhalation of a man burdened by the foolishness of others. "That's a very strong accusation, Sophia. To prove that would be a long, painful, and very expensive fight. An ugly public battle against your own children." He shook his head slowly. "Frankly, I have to refuse the case. My advice as your friend is to go home. Try to talk to them. Try to understand that they're acting out of love." Love. The word was a profanity. I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady. I gathered my papers, my damning, useless evidence. The man in front of me, the respectable pillar of the community, didn't see a victim of a crime. He saw a confused old woman, an inconvenience, a sad family drama he didn't want to get involved in. I walked out of his office and onto the town square. The sun was bright, people were laughing on the park benches, but for me, a wall had descended. A wall of law, of perception, of condescending pity. I was old. I was alone. And in the eyes of the world, I was legally, certifiably, insane. There was no one to call, no door to knock on. They had thought of everything. They had buried me alive. The lawyer's words echoed in the sterile silence of my car, each one a small, cold stone dropping into the well of my despair. Cognitively compromised. In their best interest. A family matter. He hadn't seen a woman fighting for her life. He had seen a caricature, a doddering old woman spun into a tale of loving concern by her children. He had patted my hand, the same way Leo did, the same way Clara did, a gesture meant to soothe a child, not to acknowledge an equal. I had walked out of that polished mahogany office not just defeated, but erased. They had managed to convince the world of a lie that was so complete, it had become the truth for everyone but me. I drove home not on roads, but through a landscape of memory. I saw David's hands, calloused and strong, turning the wheel of his old pickup truck on this very same stretch of asphalt. I saw a younger me, my hair tied back in a scarf, laughing in the passenger seat, the windows down and the scent of freshly cut hay flooding the cab. We were driving towards a dream then, a future we would build with our own four hands. Now I was driving back to a prison built from that very same dream, a cage gilded with my own love and sacrifice. The despair was a physical thing, a weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. For a few miles, I let it consume me. I let the tears come, hot and silent, tracing paths through the dust on my cheeks. This was it. This was the end. They had won. They had taken my home, my legacy, my very identity, and they had done it with smiles and whispers of love. The law saw them as protectors. The world saw me as a relic. But then, as I turned onto the long gravel driveway that led to the farmhouse, something shifted. The tires crunched over the familiar stones, a sound that had meant home for 50 years. I looked at the great oak tree at the bend in the road, the one David and I had sat under on our first day on this land, sharing a thermos of coffee and a map of our future. Its branches were bare against the gray sky, stark and defiant. It had weathered countless storms, droughts, and winters, and still it stood. It did not bend. It did not break. And in the silence of the car, watching that unyielding tree, a new feeling began to push through the cold sludge of defeat. It wasn't hope. Not yet. It was something colder, sharper. It was rage, but a quiet, focused rage. A rage that didn't need to scream. They wanted a dotty old woman. They wanted a confused, frail, helpless mother who needed their constant, loving care. Fine. I would give them the performance of a lifetime. If I couldn't fight them on their terms, in their world of slick lawyers and forged documents, I would fight them on mine, here, on my stage, in my home. My mind, the one they had declared broken, began to work, not with the panic of a cornered animal, but with the cold, precise clarity of a predator. I pulled up to the house, parked the car, and took a deep, steadying breath. I wiped the tears from my face, but I let the redness linger around my eyes, a touch of realism for the part I was about to play. When I walked through the door, Clara was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone, a perfect picture of casual indifference. She looked up, her expression a practiced mask of concern. "Mom, how was your appointment?" She called my trip to the lawyer an appointment, as if I'd been to the podiatrist. I let my shoulders slump. I shuffled my feet. I let my gaze wander around the room as if I couldn't quite focus on her. "Oh, it was fine, dear. Just fine." I forced a tremor into my voice. The man was very nice, a very nice young man. Clara's eyes softened with that familiar, infuriating pity. "That's good, Mom. I'm glad." She came over and put an arm around my shoulders, guiding me towards my favorite armchair. "You look tired. Why don't you sit down and rest? I'll make you some tea." I sank into the chair, a masterpiece of weary fragility. "Tea would be lovely, dear. Thank you." As she turned away, I saw it. The quick, triumphant little smile she shared with Leo, who had just walked into the room. It was a glance that said, "It's over. She's given up." They thought the fight had gone out of me. They had no idea it had just begun. My new life, my performance, started with the small things. The next morning I came downstairs and asked Leo what day it was. He told me it was Tuesday. I nodded, poured myself a coffee, and sat at the table. 5 minutes later, I looked up from my cup and asked him, "Leo, honey, what day did you say it was again?" He sighed, a long-suffering, performative sound for Clara's benefit. "It's Tuesday, Mom. I just told you." Oh, of course, Tuesday." I smiled a vacant, apologetic smile. "My mind is like a sieve these days." He patted my hand. "It's okay, Mom. We're here for you." His condescension was a thick, syrupy poison, but I drank it down with a smile. I was cataloging every patronizing touch, every dismissive sigh. They were building my case for me. My glasses became my most valuable prop. I would leave them in the sugar bowl. I'd put them in the refrigerator. I'd spend a frantic 20 minutes searching the entire living room, my voice rising in feigned panic, only for Clara to find them perched on top of my own head. She would laugh, a light, tinkling sound that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Mom, you're such a character." "I don't know what I'd do without you, Clara," I'd say, my voice trembling with gratitude. "You're my rock." And I would watch her preen, her ego swelling with the false narrative of the devoted daughter. They saw a clown. They didn't see the strategist behind the grease paint. Each day was a rehearsal. I'd forget the name of our mailman, a man I'd known for 20 years. I'd stand in the middle of the kitchen, holding a pot, and ask what I had come in for. I let them finish my sentences for me, guide me from room to room, and make my decisions. Their control, which had once felt like a tightening noose, now became my camouflage. The more they took over, the less they saw me. I was becoming invisible, a ghost in my own home, and in that invisibility, I found my freedom. My greatest performance came a few weeks into the charade. Clara was curating her online life, her phone propped up on the kitchen counter as she filmed herself making a kale smoothie. She spoke to her audience of strangers with a warmth and intimacy she never showed me. She was an influencer, a purveyor of authentic living, and her most popular content, I had learned, was her sensitive, compassionate portrayal of caring for an aging parent. I shuffled into the kitchen, timing my entrance perfectly. I leaned into the frame of her video, my expression one of genuine, befuddled curiosity. "Clara, dear?" I began, my voice a frail whisper. "What is that you're doing?" She paused her recording, her smile tightening at the interruption. "I'm just making a video, Mom." "A video?" I peered closer at the phone. "Like the moving pictures? On the television?" Her frustration was a flicker in her eyes, quickly masked by a patient smile for her unseen audience, who she had likely just resumed recording for. "Sort of, Mom. It's for my page. My followers like to see what I'm up to." This was my moment. I let a look of wonder dawn on my face. "Followers? Like a parade? That's nice, dear." But I was thinking, I was talking to Mildred from the book club, and her grandson plays the video games on the... What is it called? The Twitch? I pronounced the word with careful, elderly uncertainty. She says you can watch them play. I think I'd like to do that. It sounds exciting. Can you help me set up a Twitch, Clara? I want to watch the video games. The look on her face was a priceless cocktail of disbelief, pity, and smug triumph. Her dotty old mother wanted a Twitch account. It was perfect. It was the ultimate proof of her charming, harmless senility. For her online narrative, this was gold. A Twitch account? She said, her voice dripping with amusement. Of course, Mom. Of course I can help you with that. We can do it right now. She abandoned her smoothie, her focus entirely on me. This was far better content. She sat me down at the dining room table with her laptop, her phone propped up to film the entire heartwarming interaction. Okay, everyone, she cooed to her followers. I'm about to do something super special. My mom wants to get into the gaming world. Can you believe how cute that is? We're going to set up her very own Twitch account so she can follow all the top streamers. I played my part to perfection. I squinted at the screen. I asked what a username was. I suggested Sophia's Farm 70 and let her gently guide me to something more anonymous. I asked her to make the password David, my late husband's name, a touch of sentimental pathos that made her eyes gleam. She thought she was documenting my decline. She had no idea she was handing me the keys to the kingdom. For the next hour, she showed me how to navigate the site. She showed me how to search, how to follow, how to watch. I feigned immense difficulty, making her repeat every step 3 or 4 times. I fumbled with the mouse. I accidentally closed the window twice. It's okay, Mom, she'd say, patting my hand, her voice a sweet, condescending balm. You'll get the hang of it. It's just for fun. When we were done, she beamed, both at me and at her phone. There, you're all set up. You can watch all the video games you want. She leaned in and kissed my forehead. You're just the cutest. Thank you, my dear, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Thank you for taking care of your silly old mother. That night, after they had gone to bed, confident in my harmlessness, I sat in the dark of the living room, Clara's laptop humming softly on my lap. The house was quiet. The air was still. I wasn't watching games. I was digging. They thought the Twitch account was a sign of my unraveling mind. They were wrong. It was my library card. It was my key to the outside world, a world they thought they had locked away from me. Under the guise of watching teenagers play Fortnite and League of Legends, I opened a new browser tab. The screen's glow cast long shadows on the walls, shadows that felt like allies in the silent room. My fingers, which had trembled so convincingly on the mouse just hours before, were now steady. My first search was simple: the county's public records office. I navigated the clunky government website, my heart a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. I found the land registry portal. I typed in my own address, the address of the farm that had been my entire world, and there it was, in black and white pixels, a recent transaction, date of sale, 3 weeks ago. Seller, Sophia Miller. Buyer, EV Holdings, LLC. EV Holdings. The name was sterile, corporate, meaningless, but it snagged on something in my memory, a loose thread. I closed my eyes, pushing past the fog of my performance, reaching back into the clear, sharp archives of my mind. I thought of David. I thought of the old metal box he kept in the back of his closet, the one he called his box of ghosts. After he passed, I had never had the heart to open it. Until now. The next day, I told Leo and Clara I was feeling tired and was going to take a long nap. It was the perfect excuse. They were pleased to have me out of the way. I went to my bedroom, but I didn't lie down. I went to David's closet. The air inside smelled of him, of cedar and old cotton and something that was just David. It was a gut punch of grief, fresh and sharp, but I pushed it down. Grief was a luxury I couldn't afford right now. In the back, behind his old work boots and a stack of flannel shirts, was the box. A simple, gray, metal lockbox. The key was exactly where he always kept it, on a small magnetic hook under his workbench in the garage. I had seen him use it 100 times. I retrieved it, my hands shaking for real this time. and went back to the bedroom, locking the door behind me. I sat on the edge of our bed, the cold metal of the box on my lap. I turned the key. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed to echo through the years. Inside, nestled on top of old photographs and his military service medals, was a stack of letters, tied with a faded blue ribbon. The handwriting on the top envelope was spidery and unfamiliar. The return address was a P.O. box in a city I didn't recognize. But the name was Elias. My breath caught in my throat. Elias. My brother. The ghost I hadn't seen or heard from in nearly 50 years, not since my father had cast him out, damning him for choosing his own path over the family business. I thought he had forgotten me. I thought he was a closed chapter, a faded memory. My fingers trembled as I untied the ribbon. The letters were from David to Elias, and from Elias back to David. They had been writing to each other for decades. My husband and my brother, secretly connected all this time. They wrote about everything: the weather, the crops, the birth of my children, David's pride in Leo's business sense, and Clara's artistic talent. And they wrote about money. I found the letter that changed everything. It was from David, dated 20 years ago. In it, he was telling Elias about a new piece of equipment he needed for the farm, a risk he wanted to take to expand the dairy operation. The banks had turned him down. "So I'm asking you, brother," David had written, "not as a handout. As a loan. A business proposition. You were always the smart one. You know a good investment when you see one. And this farm, this land is the best investment I know." The next letter was from Elias. It was short and to the point. "The money will be in your account by Friday. The official paperwork will list the farm as collateral. That's just business, David. You understand. But between you and me, the real collateral is Sophia. You make sure you take care of my sister." They had made a deal. David had bet the farm on a dream, and Elias had backed him. And then I found the last letter. It was from David, written only a year before he died. His handwriting was shakier, the ink a little faded. It was a letter he must have known would be his last. "Elias," it began, "I'm worried about the kids. They're good kids, but they have appetites. They see the farm not as a home, but as an asset. They see their mother not as a person, but as an obstacle. I fear they will try to take it from her when I'm gone. I have made my will as ironclad as I can, but I know their greed. It's a hunger that can't be filled. This is my final request to you, brother. The debt you hold, the one secured by this land. If the time ever comes, if they ever try to hurt her, I need you to call it in. Protect her. It's the only thing I ask. Don't let them bury her in the house we built together." The letter fell from my hands. The room swam. It wasn't a betrayal. It was a life raft. David had seen this coming. He had known the darkness in his own children's hearts and had forged a weapon to defend me from beyond the grave. And the name of the buyer, E.V. Holdings. I thought back to the early letters, the ones where Elias was just starting out, full of fire and ambition. He wrote about his first company, a small import-export business he had poured his life savings into. He called it Elias Ventures, EV. It was him. Elias had bought the farm. He was honoring David's last wish. He had called in the debt, but he didn't know the whole story. He didn't know about the forged signature, the fake medical report, the virtual prison I was living in. He had acted on the sale, but he didn't know the soul that had been sold along with the soil. He thought he was saving the farm. He didn't know he needed to save me. I had to reach him. But how? A letter would be intercepted. A phone call would be overheard by the necklace that was always around my neck. I needed a ghost of my own, a message from the void that only he would understand. I put the letters back in the box, locked it, and returned it to its hiding place. I washed my face with cold water, composed my features back into the mask of placid confusion, and went downstairs. The plan was no longer just a vague idea. It was a blueprint. My weekly trip to the town library became my lifeline. Leo would drop me off, telling me to have fun with the old ladies at your book club. a wry smile on his face. He thought it was a harmless, quaint outing. He had no idea it was my war room. The moment his car pulled away, the mask dropped. I walked with purpose past the fiction shelves and the gossiping book club members, straight to the public computer terminals in the back corner. The computers were old and slow, the keyboards sticky, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead. But to me, this corner of the library was a fortress of solitude. Here, I wasn't a dotty old woman. I was an investigator. Using the skills Clara had so condescendingly taught me, I didn't search for streamers. I searched for Elias. He was no longer the struggling entrepreneur from David's letters. He was Elias Thorne, a titan of industry, a near recluse, a philanthropist whose name was on hospitals and university wings. Finding a direct line to him was impossible. His corporate websites were firewalls of press releases and investor relations contacts. But David had mentioned something else in his letters. Elias's guilt. The guilt of leaving, of succeeding while we had struggled. It had driven him to create a foundation, a massive philanthropic entity dedicated to righting imbalances. I found the foundation's website. It was slick and professional, full of pictures of smiling children and success stories, and at the very bottom, there was a Contact Us page, not for him, but for general inquiries to the foundation itself. A faceless email address, an electronic message in a bottle. It was my only shot. I created a new, anonymous email account, a string of meaningless numbers and letters. Then I opened a new message. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. What could I say? How could I convey the depth of the betrayal, the urgency of my situation, in a way that would cut through the noise of 1,000 other requests and be understood by only one person? I couldn't write about Leo and Clara. I couldn't mention the forgery or the lies. It had to be something else, a code, a message rooted in the language of their secret correspondence, the language of debt and collateral. The language of David's last wish. I clicked on the subject line. My mind went back to the land, the source of all this love and all this pain. Subject: the farm. Simple, direct. To anyone else, it would be spam. To him, I prayed it would be a summons. Then, the body of the email. My fingers typed the words slowly, deliberately, each one a hammer blow. I thought of David's letter. Protect her. The debt you hold. Call it in. I thought of what my children had done, selling not just the land, but my life, my freedom, my soul for their own gain. The message was only 7 words. The debt is called. The soul has been sold. I read it over and over. It was perfect. It was a cold, stark message that spoke of a business transaction, but held the weight of a dying man's plea and a sister's silent scream. It was a message that only Elias Thorne, the man who knew the secret history of that debt, could possibly understand. My heart was pounding. This was everything. My entire future hinged on this single, desperate gambit. I took a deep breath and I clicked send. The email vanished from the screen, sent out into the vast, indifferent void of the internet. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the blank screen. I had fired my only shot. I had sent my ghost into the machine. I methodically cleared the browser history, logged out of the email account, and shut down the computer. I stood up, my legs a little unsteady. I walked out from behind the stacks, my posture slowly transforming with each step. The shoulders began to stoop. The purposeful stride softened into a gentle shuffle. By the time I reached the front entrance to wait for Leo, I was Sophia Miller, the dotty old woman once more. The mask was back in place, but underneath it, something had irrevocably changed. I was no longer just a victim playing a part. I was a strategist who had just moved her queen. As Leo's car pulled up to the curb, I smiled my vacant smile. He saw his frail, forgetful mother. He had no idea he was looking at the woman who had just signed his death warrant. Now, all I could do was wait for the ghost to answer. The heavy scent of seared steak and expensive wine, a smell I hadn't known in my own dining room for years, filled the air with a choking richness. It was the scent of victory, but not mine. Leo and Clara sat at the heads of the long oak table, My husband David's table, their faces flushed with success. They had done it. They had sold my life from under me. For them, a triumph. For me, a bowl of thin, lukewarm vegetable soup, its blandness a final, petty insult. I watched them, my hands trembling slightly around the ceramic bowl, a deliberate tremor I had perfected over weeks. I was the ghost at their feast. They had grown so accustomed to my quiet, vacant presence that they barely registered me anymore, except to ensure I wasn't making a mess. Leo sliced into his filet mignon with a surgeon's precision, the silver knife a flash of cruel light. "To us," he said, raising his crystal glass of deep red wine, "and to a prosperous future, free of complications." Clara, her phone of course resting beside her plate, angled it just so, capturing the clinking of their glasses, the artfully arranged food, the rustic charm of the dining room. A perfect little snapshot of a lie for her followers. She smiled a brilliant, false smile for the camera, then took a delicate sip of her wine. "To finally being able to breathe," she added, her voice a silken murmur. "To protecting Mom's legacy by moving it into the modern age. Protecting my legacy." They used the word like a shield. They had dismantled it, piece by piece, and called it preservation. I spooned the watery broth into my mouth, the taste of nothingness. I let my eyes drift, unfocused, towards the window, playing the part they had written for me. The feeble old woman, lost in the fog of her memories. But tonight, my mind was a razor. Every detail was sharp, every sound magnified. The scrape of their forks against the porcelain plates was like nails on a coffin. My coffin. The one they had so lovingly built. I thought of the long, lonely bus rides to the public library, the stiff keys of the communal computer under my fingertips as I typed EV Holdings into the search bar, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The flash of recognition when Elias Ventures appeared on the screen. Elias, a name I hadn't dared to speak aloud in 50 years. A ghost from a different lifetime. My brother. I thought of the cryptic email I had sent from an anonymous account, my hands shaking for real this time. The debt has been called. The soul has been sold. A message in a bottle cast into the digital ocean, a desperate prayer to a man who was likely a stranger now. Leo laughed, a loud braying sound that bounced off the wooden beams David and I had installed with our own hands. Can you believe it, Clara? The look on that lawyer's face when he saw the final offer. He thought we were just a couple of hicks. He didn't know he was dealing with people who understand value. You were brilliant, Leo, Clara cooed, reaching across the table to pat his hand. You handled everything perfectly. And now, Mom is safe. She doesn't have to worry about a thing ever again. Her eyes flickered to me for a moment, a brief, dismissive glance. I met her gaze with a carefully cultivated blankness, letting my spoon clatter softly against the side of my bowl. Her expression softened into one of pity, the condescending pity of a zookeeper for a well-cared-for animal. She saw what she wanted to see, a relic, a burden, a problem that had finally been solved. She had no idea she was looking at her executioner. The clock on the mantelpiece, the one David had bought me for our 10th anniversary, ticked on, 7:58, 7:59. The sound was a countdown. In my mind, I saw the headlights of a car turning off the county road, sweeping across the fields I had plowed and planted for 5 decades. Right on schedule, as the clock began its first chime for 8 o'clock, the doorbell echoed through the house. It wasn't the familiar, friendly chime I was used to. It was a clear, resonant tone that seemed to cut through the celebratory haze in the room. Leo sighed, dabbing his mouth with a linen napkin. Who on earth could that be at this hour? Probably some local busybody wanting to borrow sugar. You'd think people would learn boundaries. Just ignore it, Clara said, waving a dismissive hand. We're having a private dinner. The doorbell chimed again, longer this time, more insistent. It was not the sound of a neighbor. It was the sound of an appointment being kept. Leo grumbled, pushing his chair back with a loud scrape. Fine, fine, I'll get rid of them. He stomped out of the dining room and toward the front hall. I heard the heavy front door unlatch, then a sliver of confused silence. I could see it all without being there. The cool night air rushing in. The sight of a gleaming black sedan, polished to a mirror shine, parked in the gravel drive where my dusty pickup truck usually sat. Its presence was an intrusion from another world, a world of power and immense wealth. A man in a suit so perfectly tailored it seemed molded to him stood by the open passenger door. And from the car, another man emerged, older, his hair the color of steel, his movements deliberate and sure. He stood with the unshakable stillness of a mountain. A face I had seen only in faded photographs and aging memories for 50 years. Elias. Leo's voice, when it came, was stripped of its earlier bravado, laced with annoyance and confusion. "Can we help you?" I didn't need to hear the reply to know the tide was turning. Clara was frowning, craning her neck to see what the commotion was. "What's taking him so long?" she muttered, more to herself than to me. Then they were standing in the doorway of the dining room. Leo looked flustered, his face pale. Behind him stood the man in the immaculate suit, his expression neutral, his eyes missing nothing. And beside him, my brother. He was taller than I remembered, or maybe I had just grown smaller. The lines on his face told the story of a life I knew nothing about, of boardrooms and battles, of victories and losses far from this quiet patch of earth. But his eyes were the same intense dark blue that held the memory of our shared childhood. Clara and Leo didn't recognize him. To them, he was just another old man, an unwelcome interruption. "What is the meaning of this?" Clara demanded, her voice sharp with indignation. "This is a private residence." The lawyer, the man in the suit, stepped forward a single pace. His voice was calm, precise, and carried the weight of absolute authority. "My apologies for the intrusion. My name is Mr. Kaito. We are representatives from Evian Holdings, the new owners of this property. This is a preliminary inspection. EV Holdings." The name hung in the air like smoke. Leo puffed out his chest, a pathetic attempt to regain control, the cornered animal baring its teeth. "The owners? Right. Of course. We know who you are. We're the ones you dealt with. We acted on our mother's behalf." He gestured vaguely in my direction, not even bothering to look at me. "I'm Leo Miller, and this is my sister, Clara. The deal is finalized." Mr. Kaito gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. But Elias didn't even look at Leo. His gaze swept past my son, past my daughter, past the lavish meal and the fine wine, and found me. His eyes locked onto mine across the expanse of the room, and in that single look, 50 years of silence collapsed into a single, breathtaking moment. The entire room, with its tension and its lies, simply fell away. There was only him and me. He saw me. Not the senile old woman, not the burden, but me. His voice, when he spoke, was a low rumble, a sound I thought I'd never hear again. It was deeper, weathered by time, but it was his. "Sophia," he said, and the name on his lips was a homecoming. "You look well." A current went through me, a strength that started in my toes and shot up my spine. It was the feeling of a parched root finally finding water. I pushed my chair back, the legs making a soft scraping sound on the wooden floor. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I stood up straight, my shoulders back, my chin high. The aches and pains I had been feigning, the stoop I had so carefully cultivated, they all dissolved. I was no longer the wilting flower in the corner. I was the oak tree that had weathered the storm. Leo and Clara stared at me, their mouths slightly agape. It was the first time they had seen me stand so tall in years. Confusion warred with alarm on their faces. Slowly, deliberately, I reached up to my neck. My fingers found the cold metal clasp of the gift Clara had given me for Mother's Day, the safety necklace. With a soft click, I unfastened it. I held it out in the palm of my hand, the small, sleek device looking obscene and sinister under the warm light of the chandelier. My voice, when I spoke, was not the frail, reedy whisper they were used to. It was clear, steady, and cold as the winter ground. "Did the deal include this listening device, Leo?" Leo's face went white. He stared at the necklace as if it were a venomous snake. What? What are you talking about? That's for your safety. My safety? I let a small, bitter smile touch my lips. Or your security? I have another question. I turned my gaze to Clara, whose perfectly made-up face was beginning to crack. Did it also include the falsified medical records declaring me mentally incompetent? Was that part of protecting my legacy too? Clara flinched as if struck. Mother, you're confused. You don't know what you're saying. Oh, I think I know exactly what I'm saying for the first time in a very long while, I replied, my voice dropping even lower. That was Mr. Cato's cue. He stepped forward, placing his polished leather briefcase on the edge of the dining table with a soft, definitive thud. The snaps opened with 2 sharp clicks that echoed in the sudden, terrible silence. He reached inside and pulled out a sheaf of papers. He laid the top document on the table, sliding it towards the center. We have the fraudulent medical report, he stated, his tone flat and devoid of emotion. The one submitted to legitimize the sale of the property. We also have a sworn and notarized statement from a Dr. Evans, detailing the pressure he was under to forge the document and his willingness to testify to that fact in a court of law. Leo looked like he had been punched in the stomach. He stumbled back a step, his eyes wide with dawning horror. Mr. Cato wasn't finished. He reached into the briefcase again. We also have, he continued, his eyes flicking for just a second to the necklace still resting in my outstretched palm, several interesting audio recordings from the past few weeks. It seems these modern GPS trackers, with their built-in microphones, can be quite revealing. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Discussions about asset liquidation, coaching on how to feign concern, and a particularly detailed conversation about the finality of the deal we are discussing tonight. Clara made a small, strangled sound. The color drained completely from her face, leaving behind a pasty gray mask of her former beauty. Her perfect facade, the one she curated so carefully for her online audience, crumbled into dust. She looked from the necklace in my hand to Mr. Cato's impassive face, to her brother's slack-jawed terror, and finally, to me. In my eyes, she didn't find the confused old woman she had manufactured. She found a judge and a jury. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavier than any sound, filled with the ruin of 2 lives. The only noise was the quiet, relentless ticking of David's clock on the mantelpiece, measuring out the first few seconds of their new reality. They had tried to bury me, to erase me from my own life. They had made one fatal miscalculation. They didn't know that all they had done was plant a seed. And I had finally broken through the soil. The silence that followed my words was a physical thing, heavier than any sound. It pressed down on the crystal glasses and the polished silver, sucking the air from the room. Leo's face, which had been a mask of triumphant glee just moments before, was now a ruin. The color drained from it, leaving behind a waxy, slack-jawed shock. Clara's hand holding a wineglass trembled so violently that red wine sloshed over the rim, staining the white tablecloth like a fresh wound. She didn't seem to notice. Her eyes were locked on Elias, her newfound uncle, as if he were an apparition. Elias paid them no mind. His focus was entirely on me, his gaze a warm and steady anchor in the swirling chaos. Beside him, his lawyer, a sharp, composed man he had introduced as Mr. Cato, stepped forward. He moved with an unnerving quietness, his presence barely registering until he was placing a crisp white envelope on the table directly in front of Leo. The soft thud it made was as loud as a gunshot in the stillness. Leo stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. He didn't move. "What is that?" Clara's voice was a thin, reedy shriek, tearing through the quiet. Mr. Cato answered, without looking at her, his voice calm and professional. "An eviction notice. It formally informs you that you and your brother are to vacate this property. You have 24 hours. The dam broke. Clara shot to her feet, her chair scraping violently against the floor. "Eviction? You can't. This is our home, our mother's home. You can't just throw us out." Her eyes darted to Elias, a desperate, wild plea in them. "He's family. He's our uncle. You can't do this to your own family." For the first time since he entered, Elias turned his gaze upon her. It was not angry. It was not heated. It was something far worse. It was like ice. A flat, dispassionate cold that held no recognition, no shared history, no warmth. It was the look one gives a stranger who has deeply disappointed you. "Family?" he said, his voice low and even, yet it cut through Clara's hysteria like a blade. "My only family in this room is my sister." His eyes left Clara, dismissing her as if she were no more than a piece of furniture, and found mine again. The ice in his gaze melted, replaced by a deep, ancient sorrow, a lifetime of missed years welling up. "I am fulfilling a promise, Sophia," he said, his voice softening, "meant only for me. A promise I made to David, long ago. And a promise I make now to you." Leo finally moved. His hand reached out, not with the arrogance he usually possessed, but with the trembling hesitation of a condemned man. His fingers brushed against the envelope. He didn't open it. He just touched it, and a shudder racked his entire body. The architect of my prison had just been handed the keys to his own. He looked at me, his eyes begging for something I no longer had to give. Forgiveness. Pity. A lifeline. I met his gaze and felt nothing. Not hatred, not triumph. Just a vast, quiet emptiness where a mother's love for her son used to be. The next 24 hours were a blur of frantic activity that I observed from a distance, as if watching a play from a high balcony. There was shouting, weeping, the sound of drawers being slammed and boxes being dragged across wooden floors. Clara's wails echoed through the halls, punctuated by furious, panicked calls to lawyers who, it seemed, were no longer taking her calls. Leo was a ghost, moving silently, mechanically, his face a hollow mask. They were dismantling the life they had tried to steal, packing away the props of their betrayal. I sat on the porch swing, the one David had built for me, and watched. I didn't help. I didn't hinder. I just watched them erase themselves from my home. The movers they'd hired in a panic were rough, careless. A gaudy vase Clara had prized was dropped and shattered on the stone walkway. She sobbed, but the sound was thin, lost in the open air. By dusk the next day they were gone. A single car, packed to the roof, crunched down the gravel driveway and disappeared onto the main road. The house fell silent. It was a silence I hadn't realized I had been craving. It was not an empty silence. It was a clean silence, free of whispers and lies, free of the oppressive weight of false smiles and veiled intentions. In the days that followed, the digital world caught up. Elias, in his quiet, protective way, shielded me from the worst of it, but he believed I needed to know. He sat with me in the sunroom, a tablet in his hand, and showed me the headlines. The story had exploded. A local news blog picked it up first, then a national outlet. The hashtags were brutal. #family fraud, #elder abuse, #greed. Clara's carefully curated online world, her brand as a lifestyle influencer built on a foundation of feigned family bliss, vanished overnight. It wasn't just a vanishing, it was an inferno. Her comment sections, once filled with fawning praise, were now a raging wildfire of public scorn and disgust. Her sponsors dropped her in a single brutal wave of press releases. Her digital life was incinerated, leaving behind only the ash of public shame. For Leo, the consequences were colder, sharper, more official. The fraudulent sale of the farm, based on a forged medical evaluation and a falsified signature, triggered more than just public outrage. It triggered an official investigation. The term wire fraud was mentioned. Conspiracy. Elder financial exploitation. His business partners distanced themselves. His accounts were frozen. The edifice of success he had built with my money and his ambition crumbled under the weight of legal scrutiny. They had wanted everything, and in their grasping, they had lost it all. I didn't feel joy at their ruin. I felt a profound, weary sadness. They had become so fixated on owning a piece of land that they had forfeited their own souls. A week later, the air was different. It was crisp and clean, smelling of dew and damp earth and the promise of a new day. Elias and I walked the fields at dawn, a ritual we had started without discussion. The rising sun painted the sky in soft shades of rose and gold, casting long shadows before us. The land felt peaceful, breathing a sigh of relief alongside me. For the first time in a long time, my steps felt light on the soil. It didn't feel like a cage, it felt like home. We stopped at the crest of the hill, looking out over the rolling expanse of green that was my life's work, my legacy. "What now?" I asked him, the words quiet in the vast morning. Elias didn't answer right away. He just looked out at the horizon, a small, sad smile on his face. Then he turned to me and held out a simple manila folder. It was unmarked, unassuming. I took it from him. It felt heavier than it should. "It was never mine to keep, Sophia," he said softly. "It was only ever mine to protect." My fingers trembled slightly as I opened the clasp. Inside, there was a single, thick document. The deed. I scanned the legal language, my eyes catching on the key phrases. A trust. The farm was now held in an irrevocable trust. My name was listed as the sole, unassailable trustee. My breath caught in my throat. Unassailable. A fortress built of paper and ink, a promise from a brother, a final gift from my husband. No one could ever try to take this from me again. No one could ever use it against me. It was finally, completely, and truly mine. I closed the folder and held it to my chest, feeling the warmth of the rising sun on my face. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves in the old oak tree nearby, and it sounded like a whisper of release. They thought my roots were shallow. They thought I was a dying plant, ready to be cleared away for their new development. They had dug a hole, put me in the dark, and covered me with dirt, waiting for me to suffocate. They tried to bury me. They didn't know I was a seed.